Okay, there we go. Right, good day, everybody. My name is Gerrie Botha from IAPSA, and with me I've got Steve van Zyl. Steve.
Hi, good day, everyone. My name is Steve van Zyl, as Gerrie said, and I think we're looking for a very interesting session today, and it's basically a topic that covers copper tubes and pipes.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about copper tubes today, or copper pipes as we normally know it in the industry. And there's obviously a reason, Steve, why we're doing that. You want to give us some information as to what happened in the recent past?
Yeah, I think, Gerrie, to kick off, we've had a lot of queries coming across our desk, members phoning through. There seems to be copper pipe that hasn't got any markings. Our members are asking, is it compliant pipe? The wall thickness of some of the pipes seems extremely thin, and just asking for guidance, like, what should we be looking for? They asking, is there anything that they could do just to verify? And I think today's session is basically that. We're going to have a look at what we have come across, and then also just provide some guidance as to, what plumbers can look at in order to ensure they're installing the correct pipe.
Okay, so I think let's start off with SANS 10252 as on the screen right now. And I think that's maybe the main reference at this point in time. And again, it talks about materials, components, and fittings, as well as fixtures that shall be so selected they are suitable for the expected conditions of use. And also, I think the most, even more important than that part is the approval shall be obtained from the local authority regarding the use of specific materials for workmanship in an area concerned. And on top of that, obviously, the JASWIC list that we all know about. Steve, I know you are involved in JASWIC. Maybe you can give the guys a bit of background on that.
Yeah, so I think, Gerrie, the only note I want to mention is that obviously that is, JASWIC first of all stands for the Joint Acceptance Scheme for Water Installation Components. It's an acceptance list. It's something where a plumber can go and have a look on JASWIC to see if a component is obviously listed there. Obviously, JASWIC's function is to make sure that those components, are tested and approved, and a lot of the councils use that list to apply that product can be approved or used in their local authority.
Right. So if we move on further down in 10252, specifically talking about copper and copper alloys, and it says here the copper alloy or copper alloy components, in contact with potable water shall comply with the minimum standard when tested in accordance with SANS 6509. Now, from my understanding, SANS 6509 talks about galvanic action, interaction in metals, and also chemicals in water. So I think what's more important in this instance is 5212 that says, notwithstanding the requirements in 5213, the following shall be deemed acceptable. Copper pipes recommended in SANS 460 for the design conditions, and then obviously the solders, fluxes, and methods of soldering described as in 460, and the manufacturer's instructions. And I think that is the most important part of what we are looking at and what our people in the audience are dealing with on a daily basis. So, again, in 10252, it also specifies, and it says, Class O and Class 1 copper tubing shall not be bent or formed in any manner during installation or installed underground. So we sometimes come across installations where there are copper pipes that's been installed below ground. And yeah, it's clear in terms of our standard that copper Class O and 1 should not be installed underground. So just be aware of that so that we don't fall into that trap where, sometimes the client insists on things and we're trying to, again, please the client, but we are shooting ourselves in the foot. So just be careful of that.
So, Gerrie, maybe just on that point, I'm just thinking from, let's say, for example, you're going to do some plumbing work and the consumer's already bought the copper pipe, and there's maybe a case of, well, you must bury this underground, and you see that it's obviously class 0, class 1, Any tips that we could maybe give the plumber? What should he be doing? I mean, how could he approach that? Or what?
Steve, I think the applicable thing or the right thing to do in that instance is, number one, is to issue a document to say that the components and the pipes were supplied by the owner or the person wanting the installation, number one. And if there's any non-compliances, then list it on that non-compliance notice so that you do not take the responsibility for those components or irregular situations afterwards. You know, we all know what happens in the long run, where a year, 2 years down the line, the owner comes back, there's a problem, and then he says, but you installed this. And how do you cover yourself? How do you protect yourself as a plumber when you are getting material or components from the owner himself?
Yeah. Look, the only takeaway there is that I just suggest that maybe put anything in writing so that you've got records to confirm that you have informed the owner as a sense of some type of record.
100%. So if we go further down, the standard also says copper pipes shall be joined with suitable compression fittings or suitable capillary solder fittings. And I think those are the methods that we use most. Some of them may be brazed as well, or silver brazing. But I think, you know, in the normal run-of-the-mill, 99% of the installations that we come across has got either compression or capillary soldering fittings. So let's stick with those. And I think one of the more important ones, again, is 852.2 that says the manufacturer's instructions shall be strictly followed when copper pipes are being joined, particularly with regard to the grade of solder and flux to be used for capillary soldered fittings. So again, it refers us back to the manufacturer installation specifications. So the question would be, how do I identify approved copper pipes? And I think to that end, we will take you to SANS 460 as mentioned in SANS 10252. And the scope of SANS 460 is it covers the requirements for plain-ended solid drawn copper tubes for the conveyance of potable water. So this is the standard that copper pipes need to comply to.
So, Harriet, that SANS 460 is a test standard to which that copper pipes are tested and need to conform to.
Yes. So in terms of that standard, if we look at section 6.2.1, it says the following information shall appear in legible and indelible marking on each straight tube at intervals of a length of not exceeding 1 meter. And I think once again that manufacturer's name or trademark will be there. But I think more important for our purposes and for our audience is the nominal outside diameter of the pipe, followed by the letters OD, and the class of that pipe needs to be displayed as on the pictures shown here. So you'll see our first little picture here is a 22 mil OD class O. Then we've got 15 mil OD class 1 and then class 2. So these are the classes of the pipe that we are referring to, and you need to obviously understand what can you apply in certain conditions. Steve?
So yeah, just to add to that, I see on the markings there, it tells you also which standard it's been tested to. So you saw that it said SANS 460 as well. And any good advice to plumbers out there is look for that on your copper pipe. And if it's not there, you know, there should be some warning bells going off. Maybe inquire where is this manufactured, maybe check with the retailer, or even if there is a reference to some manufacturer, phone and find out. Because as you mentioned on your previous slide, it clearly says, according to the manufacturer's specifications as well, Harry, and I know that you have a slide that I'm sure we're going to show the audience as to what is found on certain websites regarding that.
Yeah, so the short and the long of the question, or answering the question, is how do I know, how do I identify, is quite obvious. Is to say, if the tube or the pipe is not marked as indicated, in other words, the outside diameter and the class, then it simply does not comply. So if there's anything else printed or nothing for that matter, we've also come across those, So then one would be, I think, safe to assume that that is not a compliant component. And in that instance, you should refer to the supplier and even the manufacturer to say, "Sir, please can you give us the certification as to compliance to the standard." So if we look at the classes of tubes, and we might bore some of the people in the audience, but I think it's important just to brush through this again, is 460 also says the class of the tube shall be given as per columns 2, 3, and 4, and 5 of table 2, which we will have a look at just now. And also important there is obviously the nominal wall thickness of a tube shall be one of the thicknesses given in those columns. So just to refer to our little photographs at the bottom here, I think you can see there's quite a difference between class O, the wall thickness there, and class 2. And that's the main difference between these pipes, which will obviously also point you to the specific use of that pipe. Right, so let's have a look at table 2. And table 2 here is, as mentioned before, you'll see under the 15 mil pipe, class O will be the wall thickness there must be 0.5, class 1 0.7, and so on. So we're just going to highlight those that we mostly work with, which is class O and class 1. 22 mil, 0.6 and 0.9, and then 28, 0.6 and 0.9. So guys, this is the important part, and some of the materials out there does not comply to this.
So Gerrie, we've had some of the people querying, and as I mentioned right up front, saying that they got copper where it looks so thin, the wall thickness is extremely thin, it's breaking under the use of compression fittings, and not clearly marked on the pipe. So it's really something that plumbers need to look out for. The worst thing you want is to use a compression fitting on something that is so thin, only to come back to either the wastage of water or come back to a job or result in damage. So it's a very, very important aspect.
Well, Steve, just picture this, do installation. Let's say it's a new installation. You do the whole property with non-approved material. You use compression fittings, and 6 months or a year down the line, the leaks start popping through the wall. Then you will have to go back and have to go and redo that whole installation. And I don't think any of our listeners would like to go through that situation. So that's why we're doing what we're doing here today. So also in terms of 460, under section B or annex B, which is informative, in other words, it's a recommendation. It says here, the choice of the suitable class of copper tube will depend on the particular application and could be influenced by environmental factors such as soil conditions and water chemistry.
So yeah, I think Gerrie, it's a good point, because certain areas the soil condition could be a little bit more acidic or a little bit more corrosive. I think of areas where there's maybe a bit more dolomite areas versus other areas which are a bit more lime, and just areas that maybe just have a different soil condition and has an effect on metal such as copper.
Yeah. And once again, they also refer to the manufacturer to say, we need to always, have a look at the manufacturer specification. And if you're not sure for a specific condition, contact that manufacturer and ask for guidance as to, can I use this product in that situation? Then just going through the classes quickly. Under Annex B, and this is just a description of the different classes. Class O, which is a light gauge pipe, suitable for general domestic plumbing services. However, they also recommend that you cannot use it for flare type compression fittings, and it should be used in straight line connections, and obviously not suitable for bending, as mentioned before. If we move on to class 1, similar usage. However, this tube can be bent, but with bending equipment. In other words, you cannot bend it with a spring or with your hand. It's not suitable for that purpose. And then Class 2, suitable for general use in domestic plumbing services. Also, you can bend these tubes. And this you may be able to bend maybe with a spring or with your hands. And then obviously Class 3, which is a heavier gauge, and that can be maybe suitable for underground. Again, referring to the conditions, just make sure before you do it, make sure of the soil conditions that you do not do this installation, and you'll have to remove it later on. So if we look at some of the manufacturer specification here, and we've taken two of the more prominent pipe manufacturers in South Africa, and if you look at their conditions here again, on this one it says recommended usage, and it says on Class O, recommended for above ground only and should not be bent. So I think that's quite clear. And similar on this side, it says a hard drawn with a thin wall tube for the use without bending, recommended for use with capillary solderings and above ground installations only. We then look at Class 1, it says recommended for above ground use only, should only be bent with a bending tool having an inner and outer former. And here it says spring bending is not recommended. So once again, look at these manufacturer specification, and the other manufacturer says something similar. It says it's a tube in half-hard condition, which should be bent only with benders which have an inner and outer former, recommended for the use with both capillary and soldered compression fittings, and for above ground usage. So I think important is to always keep in mind what is the manufacturer specification. And if you're not sure, you need to go back to the manufacturer to make sure that I'm using the right product for the right purpose.
Okay, can't agree more. I think these are good tips and good points. Check with the manufacturer. The last thing you want to do is to put compression fitting on something that they say you shouldn't.
Yeah. And I think a last important thing that's also enforced under Annex A, which is normative, Steve. And what does normative mean?
So it's not informative or a if or must. It's I almost use the word. It's almost a must.
Yeah,
like, you know,
it's a requirement.
Yeah, normative.
So under Section A, there says the following requirements must be specified in tender invitations and in each order or contract. So, and that I think is one of the things that we may be missing as plumbers, is that we don't specify enough the material that we are using. And I think this you can use as a tool for negotiation when it comes to tenders, because if you list on your tender or your invoice or whatever, you can actually, you'll have an argument to say, this is the class of tube that I'm using, the nominal size of the tube, and then if needs be the relevant length, which is normally 5.5 meters. But I think it's important to include this in all your documentation, because you can now compare to the person that's using non-compliant items to say and to tell the owner, the developer, or whoever this person is, to say, but this is what I'm supplying. So that's why I'm asking this price. And I think that will differentiate you from the next guy that's not as professional as you are.
Gerrie, the only thing I want to add there, I mean, I think from our officers' point of view, we support the use of copper pipes. I mean, there's no ways we support it as one of the acceptable materials to be used in the plumbing installation. You know, however, we only like to endorse the use of fully compliant pipes as an example.
100%. So I think that brings us to the question, who will be held responsible if there's a problem in the installation later on? And there's only one answer there, and that will be you. When you do an installation with unapproved and substandard materials, you will be the person being held responsible for damages and or things that happens afterwards. And then I think the last question there is the risk really worth it? You know, do I want to go this route? Do I want to save 2 Rand to spend 20 Rand down the line? That's the question, in my humble opinion. Steve?
So, Gerrie, I think I'd like to just maybe try and sum up on some of the stuff that you pointed out and some of the things that you've mentioned in the standards. I think it's quite evident that SANS 10252, as you mentioned, the mandatory standard specifies recommendations that copper pipes must comply to SANS 460. The queries that are coming across the desk, pipes that are unmarked, wall thicknesses that are just like it almost tends to want to break when you're typing, working on that pipe. Search, I think that's the message that we got here, is make sure that you're working with a compliant pipe. I think from an identification, we've tried to give a bit of guidance as to what to look for to help the plumbers out there to say, well, look for that markings. That's defined in SANS 460, which is the test standard. And I think you've made it repeatedly saying, engage with the manufacturer, see how they want that product installed, and ask for things like, is there a test certificate? Does this conform to SANS 460? At the end of the day, I think we all want to do the correct application. We want to use the correct product. And obviously, we want to make sure that we don't go back to those jobs. And somewhere, as you said, who's responsible? And I think today's talk is to give those tips, to say, just be aware of these kind of things. Because it is happening, hey? There's definitely stuff that's coming on the market where there's no markings on it. We don't even know where to start.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, you don't even know where it comes from. So I think it's important, these guidelines, if you take it to heart and you work according to this, then I'm convinced that you won't fall into that trap where you'll have to come back and replace some items which you should have checked for in the beginning. I think that's it for me, Steve. Thank you for attending. Thank you for having a look at what we are talking about today. And I would like to say thank you for your attendance and stay safe and enjoy whatever you're going to do.
From our side, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed today's session. Like I said, there's a lot to look out for. And it always feels like, as plumbers, we need to cover all the bases. But unfortunately, it's one of those things we need to look for. The markings are important. Have an awesome day further. If you've got any queries or questions on today's session, please drop us an email to info@iopsa.org. Furthermore, have an awesome day further and take care.
Thank you. Cheers.